How oft when thou, my music placed upon that blessed wood, whose motion sounds with thy sweet fingers, when thou gently sway'st to the wiry concord that mine ear confounds, do I envy those jacks that nimble leap to kiss the tender inward of thy hand, whilst my poor lips, which should that harvest reap, at the wood's boldness by thee blushing stand. To be so tickled, they would change their state and situation with those dancing chips, on whom thy fingers walk with gentle gait, making dead wood more blest than living lips. Since saucy jacks so happy are in this, give them thy fingers, me thy lips to kiss. So, yesterday we finally got to meet the Dark Lady. Today we find out that she was a skilled musician. How cool is that? So Shakespeare wrote her this sonnet, and it's one of two in the whole collection that are explicitly musically themed. The other one is Sonnet 8, and that was one of the early procreation sonnets to the fair youth. So before we dig into this one, I just want to talk about some of the similarities between these two sonnets. So Sonnet 8 begins like this: Music to hear, why hear'st thou music sadly? Sonnet 128 begins, How oft when thou, my music placed. In both cases, whether he's talking to the fair youth or the dark lady, he's talking about music, but he's also calling the object of his affection music. He's saying, you are my music. You are music to me. So that's very sweet. But also, we talked about this a few weeks ago, but sometimes it seems that Shakespeare will put a specific sonnet with a specific number in order to correspond to the subject matter of the sonnet. So, for example, Sonnet 12 is about a clock. How many numbers are on a clock? 12. Sonnet 60 is about minutes. How many seconds in a minute? How many minutes in an hour? 60. In the case of Sonnet 8, it's about music. So how many notes in an octave? 8. Sonnet 128, also about music. So 8 notes in an octave. But also, how many notes are in a chromatic scale? 12. So put them together, 12, 8, 128. Isn't Shakespeare clever? So, in this sonnet specifically, Shakespeare is describing watching the Dark Lady play the harpsichord or the virginal, which was an ancestor of the modern day piano. So it was a keyboard instrument. So he's talking about admiringly watching her play the keyboard, but he's also personifying the keys on the keyboard. So he says, how often when you, my music, are playing music on that blessed wood, the blessed wood of the keyboard, whose motion sounds with thy sweet fingers when thou gently sway'st. Sway had two meanings. First, to move rhythmically with the music, but also it meant to govern or control. So if you're familiar with Portia's Quality of Mercy speech in The Merchant of Venice, she says, mercy is above this sceptered sway. So he's saying that the Dark Lady is not only swaying rhythmically with the music as she plays, but she's governing the music. She's creating it or controlling it. She's creating the wiry concord that mine ear confounds. Wiry refers to the strings on the harpsichord. So this music that she's creating is so beautiful, it confounds his ears, it amazes his ears. But he gets jealous of the keys. He says, I envy those jacks that nimble leap to kiss the tender inward of thy hand. Because he says, my lips should be the ones that get to kiss the inside of your hand, not these keys on the keyboard. And he gets scandalized by the impudence of this wood to kiss her fingers, to kiss the hands of the woman that he's attracted to. Then he says, to be so tickled, isn't that a great word? To be so tickled. His lips would gladly trade place with the keys on the keyboard, with the dancing chips. Isn't that a great turn of phrase? You can just see the keys dancing under her fingers. Anyway, his lips would gladly trade places with the keys, because as it is now, the dead wood of the keys are more blessed than his living lips, because they get to touch her hands. That reminds me a lot of Romeo talking about Juliet, saying, would I were a glove upon that hand, because the glove would get to touch Juliet's face. Then he finishes by saying, well, since saucy jacks so happy are in this, since the keys seem so happy that you're playing them, I guess they can keep your fingers, but I want your lips. I want your lips so that I can kiss them. So, this is probably one of the sweetest sonnets that Shakespeare wrote to the Dark Lady, because as you'll see, they get real dark and real sexual real fast. But this sonnet is also actually pretty dark. It has some dark undertones, because he's using this word jacks to refer to the keys. Now, editors will point out that jack wasn't quite the right word, because technically the jack was like on the underside of the key, and it's what plucked the strings on the harpsichord. But I don't think Shakespeare cared, because I think he was like, semantics, because he was really going for the secondary meaning of the word jack, which he used to refer disparagingly to other men, in the way that we would say that jack off or that jerk, because he referred to the Dark Lady frequently in his sonnets to her as a whore. Now, whether she was actually a literal sex worker or Shakespeare's just being a misogynist dick, we don't know. But at any rate, she got around. She had sex with lots of men. And so he's not just talking about the keys on the keyboard. He's talking about being jealous of all of the men who are surrounding her while she plays the keyboard, and that they nimble leap to kiss the tender inward of her hand. And he's jealous of all these other men that are surrounding her and having their way with her. And he says he would gladly trade places with them. And imagine him referring to these men as dancing chips. They're, doing somersaults trying to get her attention. And then he says, making dead wood more blessed. Obviously, that has some penis connotations. So then he says, essentially, well, since all these saucy jacks, these impudent men, are so happy to be enjoying you sexually, I guess they can keep your fingers. You can give them as many hand jobs as they want, fine. But I want your lips. I want your love. It reminds me a lot of the closing couplet to Sonnet 20, to the fair youth. In that sonnet, he's talking about how because the fair youth is a man, he was made for women's sexual pleasure. And he finishes by saying, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasure. So he's saying, you can have sex with other women, that's fine. They can have your body, but I want your love. In the same way that here he's saying to the Dark Lady, you can have, the other men can have your fingers, the other men can have sex with you, that's fine, but I want your love. It's funny that as different as his two lovers are, and as different as his relationships with both of them are, he seems to be making the same compromise, that you can have sex with other people, but I want your love. We'll see how well that works out for him. Polyamory can be tricky. So anywho, that is Sonnet 128. We'll talk about the Dark Lady more tomorrow. All my love, everybody. Stay safe. Bye.